This deal being made by the Spurs and the Raptors, from the Spurs' perspective, what are your thoughts?
I think it's a curious move. By the way, good afternoon to you guys. I'm learning a lot of new lyrics to rap songs. Thanks, Ro. It's 3D and I talked about this when the news of Kawhi potentially being traded and all the things that were transpiring between the organization and Kawhi's group. And 3D and I really hit on this point, Ro, and that is for the way that Coach Pop and RC have handled the organization over the course of their time there. There's been a lot said, and I was very fortunate to be part of this experience, about there's no one player that's greater than the team. What I think would have been really difficult to swallow for all the years that Pop and RC have done this is for them to have extended Kawhi Leonard to that max contract, given all the years that Tim Duncan sacrificed money, Manu Ginobili sacrificed money. All of the times we've heard Pop talk about how he's built the culture and what he believes in, to reward Kawhi Leonard in that way, given what the franchise had to deal with over the past year with the grumblings and the back and forth and not stepping up and doing your job, that would have been the curious thing. So I'm not surprised that San Antonio didn't, go all the way in. They obviously extended their hand to try to make this relationship something that they could repair. And at some point, they're going to make the decision, and 3D knows this, that their basketball team is bigger than any one of their players. And I think that that's why we got to this point where a trade was going to happen. Now, I think a lot of us are surprised that it's Toronto. We thought, Lakers, Clippers, and maybe Philly sliding in. It's a curious move. It's a bold move by Masai Ujiri to do what he's done. But the Spurs were ready to move on. And interesting the way they're going to go about their rebuild, adding another mid-range shooter to a team that, has moved off the three-point line and now has some more versatility in a stud in DeMar DeRozan.
And with that being said, Bones, how does Pop and the brass change his thinking, knowing he's upset that the Raptors said they weren't going to trade him out in Vegas, then he does get traded? How does that system change his mind and make him feel welcomed?
Well, you and I know this, 3D. Time will help that out. It's still, we're talking July. We've got a couple of months still before guys are going to get themselves to the cities where they're about to play and begin training camp. There's always a lot of hurt feelings, and as a player, you always take a trade. Your perspective on those trades become a lot different as you get older. And I know DeMar's talking a lot about loyalty and about promises. Look, we understand loyalty for a player should always be about the game. That's it. You want somebody in your corner. You want to believe in the franchise and the organization. But when it comes down to it, you've got to believe in what it is you bring to the game. And DeMar will get back to that, I think, very, very quickly. The interesting one, 3D and Ro, is Kawhi going to Toronto. This is Nick Nurse's first full-time head coaching NBA job. What is he going to do with that team that, last year pushed the envelope, tons of wins, has tons of expectations? How does Nick Nurse handle assimilating a guy like Kawhi Leonard into what they want to do systematically? That's going to be an interesting thing that their training camp, coming out of training camp, how it is that they play and the approach of Kawhi Leonard.
So you have DeMar DeRozan, who's played at an all-star level in the Eastern Conference, but in some opinions, he hasn't met expectations in the postseason. So now going to San Antonio, do you think that he can live up to those expectations? And is he the type of player that can fit in Pop's system, as he's been more looked at as an ISO player in the Eastern Conference?
Hey, Ro, if you want to play for Pop, you better fit into the system. or you're not going to play. Absolutely, DeMar can do that. Look, the guy's been on the All-Star team for the past 5 years. He's averaged over 20 points the last 5 years in the Eastern Conference. Obviously beloved since he got to Toronto back in the 2009-10 season. DeMar will figure this out, and San Antonio will find ways to use him, and they will be effective. Look, the team won 47 games last year with Kawhi just suiting up for 9 of those. You add DeMar DeRozan in his prime. You add Pirtle, a very capable big man that they think could probably do a lot of switching on the perimeter and still guard an area that has a lot of room to grow, a great prospect out of Utah. And then you have some flexibility with the draft choice. I know Masai did a great job of protecting that 2019 pick 1 through 20. And I think it turns into a couple second-rounders if that doesn't happen for San Antonio. But this team, San Antonio, will find ways to still be competitive, and they didn't want to give up on that by bringing in DeMar DeRozan at this point in his career and the security of those 3 years. Now, whether he stays there or not, I'm with Griff. Who knows? But for right now, I think it's the deal that San Antonio sort of had to make, and nobody stepped up with a better offer given their question marks about Kawhi Leonard and his health.
And with that question mark, Bones, let's say Kawhi and Masai Ujiri have the right conversation, he buys all the way in. So when you bring he and Danny Green into the situation, two champions, when you look at that roster, you say, wow, if all these guys buy in, this Eastern Conference could be wide open. Maybe this team could get back to the top again.
Oh, 3D. Their roster is legit. You got their best player is Kyle Lowry. I know DeMar DeRozan is the favorite in Toronto, but Kyle over the past couple seasons has been their most important and most valuable player. You're going to have Danny Green, who's played 100 playoff games, step into that role with C.J. Miles behind him. Great veterans and guys who can pull the trigger from the three-point line. Kawhi Leonard potentially starting at the 3, Serge Ibaka at the 4, Valanciunas at the 5. And then all that bench unit last year that came in and had massive impact. Fred VanVleet, OG. They're going to be at Pascal Siakam. They're going to have a very complete roster, 3D, and it's going to be exciting, again, just to see how quickly and how much Kawhi Leonard impacts what Toronto can do and be about for next season.
Of course, the big bombshell dropped. Now, we have to wonder, what does this mean when you move your all-time leading scorer to San Antonio and you get Kawhi Leonard in return?
Well, you're getting arguably one of the top 5 talents in the NBA, but probably only for a year at the most. It's you're moving a guy, DeMar DeRozan, who professed to want to play his entire career in Toronto. He more than any other Raptor, and I've covered the team since day one, accepted the responsibility of being the face of the franchise, the city, and the country. I think there are mixed signals out there right now about what this means for Masai Ujiri's willingness to pull the trigger, obviously, on a major trade, and what the long-term implications are. It's a big gamble, but, every trade is. And is Kawhi Leonard now the best player in the Eastern Conference? I think you can make that case if he's healthy as he was in a year and a half ago.
Well, you mentioned long-term right there, but what about short-term? Let's look forward to next season. Is Toronto now the team to beat in the Eastern Conference?
If you could start Kyle Lowry, Danny Green, Kawhi Leonard, OG Anunoby, and Jonas Valanciunas and bring off the bench Fred VanVleet, Pascal Siakam, C.J. Miles, DeLon Wright, and Serge Ibaka, you're pretty good. And in the Cleveland Free Eastern Conference, I think you're absolutely as good as Philadelphia and Boston and Indiana.
So going back to long-term, you mentioned Masai Ujiri. So what are the chances that he could keep Kawhi Leonard here past this one season?
I think they're probably remote. Everything that anybody's heard is that Kawhi has designs on going to live and play in Los Angeles. But this does sort of, if it is only 1 year and it doesn't work out, it sort of hastens any kind of rebuild that Masai's got in plans. He's constructed this team to have 2 more years with this group, with the formerly DeRozan, Ibaka, Valanciunas group. And this sort of moves up that process 1 year if it fails. Obviously, it's a gamble because the trades of players of this magnitude is a huge gamble, but the short-term implications are good. The long-term implications aren't all that much difference. Because if in 2 years the Raptors weren't good, they were going to blow it up anyway. And this sort of moves that up a bit of a year.
Well, it's definitely a high risk. Hey, Doug Smith, thanks for joining us. It continues to be crazy, so we have to bring in our Hall of Famer, David Aldridge, to get the latest scoop on what's going on. So, DA, what does this mean for Toronto? And number one, what does this mean for Kawhi?
Well, look, Ro, I think it's a gamble. There's no doubt about that. You're taking a chance on a guy who has told you very specifically that he did not want to be traded to Toronto. And you're taking him anyway. Now, if you're the Raptors, you're saying, we think we have a chance with LeBron out of the East finally, the guy that's beat us 3 straight years in the playoffs and tormented us, to maybe break out of the East and get to the finals with a healthy Kawhi Leonard. And certainly you would put them on that top line with Philly and Boston with a healthy Kawhi Leonard. But the question is, what happens after this year? What happens if you don't make the finals? Now, they believe, the Raptors believe, they've got a lot of young talent on that team. They love the picks that they've brought in the last few years, Van Vliet and Wright, Siakam. They really think those guys, and Onanabe last year, are ready to take a big step. They may have to if Kawhi leaves and you wind up trading DeMar DeRozan essentially for nothing, or for a guy that's only going to be there for a year. But it's a gamble that they're willing to take because the East is that open next year.
Yes, a major gamble indeed. So let's move to the other side. Looking at San Antonio, you have DeMar DeRozan, who recently re-upped with Toronto, goes in the press conference, declares that he is Toronto, wants to be there. The first player that they drafted that actually re-signs with the Raptors. Now he goes to San Antonio, and he appears to be a little bit in his feelings about everything that's going on.
Well, look, DeMar has been very upfront over the last year about his own issues with mental health and depression and things like that. And, you know, he wears his heart on his sleeve. As you mentioned, he really repped Toronto honestly and forthrightly for 9 years. I mean, all you heard before DeMar DeRozan got there was about people who didn't want to be in Toronto, didn't want to play for Toronto long term. Well, this was a guy that was drafted there from Los Angeles, never expressed any desire than anything other than remaining in Toronto for his whole career. He didn't even take a visit when he was a free agent a couple of years ago, Ro. He signed that big contract, the extension right away, and wanted to be a Raptor for life. And, you know, if you look at his Instagram post this morning, they back up what we have all been reporting, is that he is very upset about this trade. He feels like the Raptors lied to him. You know, he and his representatives talked with them last week in Las Vegas, and what they are saying is they were assured he wasn't going to be dealt. Now, look, things change. We understand that. But he's not taking it very well right now.
So it seems like we've seen this before. A player that is an all-star who's from the Southern California area who wants to sign with the Los Angeles Lakers. So going back to Kawhi, we seem to have seen this with Paul George before. He ends up getting traded to Oklahoma City, falls in love with the culture there, ends up re-signing. So is there a chance that Kawhi could possibly end up staying with the Raptors? You see that happening in any scenario?
Well, look, Ro, I've learned, I'm old enough to know that you never say never, right? So it would be silly for me to say that the Raptors have no chance to re-sign Kawhi Leonard. If they do run the table, if they do get to the NBA Finals, and he plays a big role in that, and they're successful, and he bonds immediately with Kyle Lowry and some of the other players there. Look, anything can happen. What I'm telling you today, in the middle of July, is he didn't want to go there. He doesn't want to pay the taxes that he's going to have to pay there. And, I mean, that's a real thing, you know, for players. Is that, you know, he was coming from a state with no state income tax to a place that taxes you pretty liberally. So that's a factor. And, you know, that was not a place he wanted to go. I can tell you that even though he didn't want to go to L.A., and he preferred the Lakers, but he would have been okay with the Clippers, from what I'm told, he would have given Philly a fair look. You know, it's no guarantee that they would have been able to re-sign him either, but he felt a lot more comfortable at least giving Philadelphia a real fair shot, especially given that Brett Brown is the coach there and he knows him from San Antonio. So that is not as big a case in Toronto. But you've got to give Masai Ujiri, Nick Nurse, the new coach, the players, the staff, the organization a chance to make their impression on him, and we'll see what happens. But right now, he is not inclined to stay there.
Yes, we definitely will see what happens. D.A., thanks for joining us, but stay close. We might have you come back just in case something else happens. Thanks.